Okay, Sriyoshi, we are live.
Let's prepare to go live. We've brought the first group of presenters in. Sounds good. All right. Well, good morning. I'm the Executive Director of the Public Design Commission, and welcome. If you're joining us via Zoom and would like to testify, please sign up through the Google form link as well. And that's also linked on the meeting agenda. Commissioners, a reminder to please bring the microphone close to you and speak into them when talking. I will hand it over to our chair, Deborah Martin.
Good morning. I'm Deborah Martin, Chair at PDC. Welcome to the Public Design Commission meeting. Today's meeting is being held in person at City Hall. Members of the public can attend and give testimony either in person or remotely. The public meeting is now commencing with the consent agenda and items number 28877 to 28895. Please note, Commissioner Maloney's recusal from item 28877 and 28879, and Commissioner Castilla's recusal from item 28886. Are there any other recusals to note? Okay, seeing none, let the record show there are no other recusals. I'll now call for the vote. Commissioners, when I call your name, please state your vote for the consent agenda. Isabel Castilla? Approval. Lori Hawkinson, who I note is voting remotely because of caregiving reasons. Lori, approved. Bill Heinzen?
Approved.
Carrie Maloney? Merrill Tisch? Jimmy Van Bramer?
Approved.
And I also approve. Let the record show all are in favor and the consent agenda is approved. Okay. We'll now commence with the public hearing portion of the meeting. The first item is 28896, preliminary review of the construction of a plaza adjacent to City of School High School at West Houston Street and Hudson Street in Manhattan. Per standard procedure, applicants will give their presentation, then public testimony will be heard, and then the commission will ask questions, deliberate, and vote. We'll hear in-person testimony first, followed by testimony from remote participants. We can now proceed with the presentation. Welcome.
Morning, everybody. My
Morning.
name is Alicia West, and I'm here from the Department of Environmental Protection. We are so thrilled to be here today to present this plaza design. This is a partnership project between DEP and the Parks Department. We have done a couple of plazas like this. I'll show you a photo of those in a moment. But for this one, we're really thrilled to be able to work with the Hudson Square BID. We have Samara Karasik here from the BID, the executive director, who can answer any questions. And the BID and Parks Department have a history of working together. Some of you may recall Spring Street Park, which is a partnership between those two. And they've been a really proven partner and just done wonderful things in that community. They have brought on board MNLA and a team of designers, and Michelle is here from MNLA and she's going to present the design to you today. But I just want to walk quickly through a couple of slides. So these are two of the plazas that opened about 2 years ago. Manuel Plazas on East 4th Street and Rappingale Plazas on Brand and Lafayette. These are a very particular kind of open space for our city. This is DEP owns the underlying property. We have a tremendous amount of critical infrastructure underneath, but they do sort of to the passerby look very empty and underutilized. And so we've been thrilled to be able to work with our partners at the Parks Department to really enliven these spaces. This one went through the Landmarks Commission, but some of you may be familiar with the one on 4th Street. They've become really wonderful assets to their communities. They're really well used. And so we're really thrilled to be able to work with the Hudson Square BID, who has even more resources than our city partners and can really take additional steps to make these really activate the plaza. So very quickly, and Michelle's going to walk through the site context as well as the design, but our site is on West Houston and Hudson Street, and you can kind of see how it fits within the BID's boundaries, which is the pink line. And really our goals for this is to figure out how to make a true amenity to this community with a passive open space while retaining DEP's routine access to the infrastructure within. So that is a challenge because our operators do go to the site frequently. They need to bring trucks in, but we've been working collaboratively with our partners to make sure that as this design has developed, we've been very clear about those parameters and figuring out something that's going to really work. So we're really pleased. I can't go into a great amount of detail about that, Commissioner. I apologize. It is sort of a secure matter, but it is related to our water distribution system. Yes. And Michelle will walk you through a bunch of these other goals and also talk a little bit about the community engagement that we've done. But we're really looking to increase the ecological benefits of the site, really work on greening this space, and create a gateway for Hudson Square from both the north and the east, and also really reflect the creative spirit of the district. So our site is about a quarter of an acre, and we have $3.62 million. DEP has kicked in $1 million towards this project. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Michelle.
Thank you.
I will stick around for any questions. And Samara is also here to answer any questions about maintenance and operations.
Thanks, Alicia. As Alicia said, my name is Michelle Richmond. I'm the project manager for this project at MNLA. I'm going to spend a moment going through site context and existing conditions before we move on to the design. The site is located in Manhattan within the bounds of CB2 and within the Hudson Square Business Improvement District. It is at the northeast corner of West Houston and Hudson Streets. Directly to the east is a building that houses 2 schools, including Cydia School. To the south is the Federal Building. To the west is the Carpenters Union Building, and to the north is J.J. Walker Park. It sits generally within commercial office, other commercial office buildings, and a smattering of industrial and residential buildings as well. Within a 5-minute walk of the site there's very little open space. Directly to the north is J.J. Walker Park, and the Hudson Streetscape is to the south. There is more open space within a 10-minute walk, including Hudson River Park and Pier 40. And Hudson House and Plaza really sits at the north end of the Hudson Streetscape greening, and it really acts as a gateway to Hudson Square from the north. And just a step back in time, it's always good to remember where we came from. The site has been empty for 100 years. Like there really has been nothing that has happened. There's a lot that has happened below grade recently, but above grade, it really has been empty for quite a long time. The existing conditions are, there's a chain link fence around the outside. The current truck access is off of Hudson Street in the north. And then there are a number of manholes and valves and hatches that will need to remain on site. Right now, the site is mostly permeable. We worked very closely with DEP and Parks to create this foundational diagram of what is possible in which spaces. The main takeaways are that Zone C is the only location where we can have trees and footings. Zone B, we can have planting, and Zone A needs to be paved for access. The site is incredibly flat across the 125 feet. There's a foot, or actually slightly less than a foot of grade change. And there are 4 elements that are above grade. There are 2 vent structures and then 2 shafts as well, hatches as well that go down. The Ellis mural dominates the site. It is highly photographed, and the community is really appreciative of this. And so this is something we heard quite a bit from the community to keep the mural. As I said, there are 4 elements that sit above grade, and you can see a number of the hatches here. What is important about these is that there's 2 different manhole conditions. One where the existing aggregate comes right up to the edge, and we'll be able to have whatever our finished surface treatment is come right up to the edge. And in the other condition, the manholes are concrete encased, and we'll have to maintain that concrete. So whatever our finished treatment is will come up to the edge of that concrete. We spent about 2 months of extensive community engagement and spoke with a lot of people and distilled what we learned into 5 guiding principles for the design. The first is that the spaces need to be flexible. They need to be inclusive. There should be as much green as possible. So really having it be a landscape forward site. Have the site be art centric. So keeping the mural, celebrating the mural, and for the site to be as welcoming as possible. Okay, into the design. The main entrance, the main pedestrian entrance for the site is off of the corner of West Houston and Hudson, and it is canted to try and be as welcoming as possible. The main DEP truck access will be off of Hudson Street over here, which is exactly where it is now. And then there's a secondary pedestrian entrance along West Houston directly next to the school. On the northern and eastern portion of the site, we have a tree and bosque umbrella, a tree and umbrella bosque that defines some smaller spaces. Along the West Houston and Hudson Streets, we have a fence with a vine trellis and shade structure integral in specific chunks where we have space and clearances. And then there are a number of different furnishings throughout the site. So below the tree bosque, we have benches and movable tables and chairs. And then below the trellises, we have benches and an interactive feature called the Daydreamer, which we'll talk about more in a moment. We also have custom furnishings, custom modular furnishings in a few different locations. And these are modular furnishings on casters that can be set up in different configurations. The bid will be responsible for the actual movement of these. They will not be able to be moved by the public. And then again, thinking about those 5 guiding principles, trying to maximize the most amount of canopy as possible, introducing shade as well, carrying colors of the mural out into the landscape and really allowing for the colors to draw the mural into the space. Thinking about flexible spaces. So one larger space on the western portion of the site that can be broken down into a few medium or small size spaces. And then also some smaller spaces below the bosque. Really thinking about a palette of site furnishings that will support a diverse group of people and then making it as welcoming as possible. So going from left to right on here, we have the mural with the bosque right next to it. After that, we have our trellis along West Houston with the Daydreamer interactive feature that sits right below it. The main entrance off the corner of West Houston and Hudson. And on the Hudson Street side of the fence, we have a slightly taller trellis to provide additional shade from the west. So one of the things that we heard from the community is make it as green as possible. And in areas where we cannot have horizontal green, we're looking at introducing vertical green. So one of the elements that we have along the fence is this shade structure and vine trellis that really allows us to carry the green vertically where we can't have it horizontally. The Daydreamer interactive feature is a rotatable and rocking element with light and sound, which we'll take a look at a little bit more. But there are 2 rest positions, one which is perpendicular to the fence and one which is parallel. And again, looking at different groupings of furnishings so that we can have a larger group of people sit in that area. The Ellis Island mural dominates. So as I said previously, we're looking at different ways to carry those colors out. And one of those ways is through the umbrellas and site furnishings. So really building on the color palette within the site furnishings and the space itself. And then a little bit closer look at the modular furnishings. One of the reasons we are looking at this is to really be able to carry additional seating and shade into the spaces where we can't have anything below grade. And then below the bosque, trying to maximize the amount of green as possible and really provide additional smaller spaces for people to sit within. So the different elements of the site on the eastern side of the site, we have a diamond grid structural system with aggregate infill to make it both permeable and accessible, and then permeable pavers in the pink area. And the larger bands of the permeable pavers actually pull directly from the mural across horizontally on the site. We're looking at using 3 different colors of permeable pavers. The site is framed with a tree and umbrella bosque on the north and the east sides. And then on the south and the west sides is the fence with the integrated shade and trellis structure. So the fence is powder coated steel posts with a fence mesh infill. And another thing that we heard very clearly from the community was to make it as transparent as possible, which is one of the reasons why we are looking at using a material like this along the fence to be as transparent as possible, but also allow for vine growth. The furnish.
We can. The bottom view through the tree canopy or alley, where would that be?
So this area is this area here. So it's these circular elements within the bosque.
Okay, but nowhere in particular.
No specific area. in
Okay.
particular, no. The furnishing palette consists of 5 different elements. There's movable tables and chairs below the bosque, the Daydreamer interactive feature along the West Houston fence, the modular furnishings, the Hudson Square Big Billy trash and recycling cans, and the bench that is wood and steel. We are looking at using Kebony for both the modular furnishings and the bench so that we're using a sustainable non-tropical wood on the site. And this was used on one of the other DEP and park sites as well with success. The interactive feature, which is the Daydreamer, is just over 8 feet tall. It is located here. We are looking at introducing 2 along this edge, and it rotates and rocks in both directions. The hoop, it does have light on it, and there's actually sound below the bench that goes directly down. It is choral notes. So when it's not moving, there is no sound. When it's rotating, those notes do come out. They change the notes based on the sound and speed and the speed and the direction of the rotation. And the intent is to group these together because as they start rotating in sync, you get choral notes that are in sync and harmonized together, so that you're really creating this interaction across multiple elements. The modular furnishings, again, are steel sides with wood and on casters so that the bid can move them, but not movable by the public. We are looking at introducing umbrellas on a number of them so we can try and pull shade into the sunnier areas of the site. For the lighting, the areas where we anticipate potential truck and person interaction, we are anticipating a 2-foot candle average across this area, and within the Bosque, about a 1-foot candle average. 3000 Kelvin is the color temperature for both areas. And this is accomplished with 2 different lighting elements. There are 2 pole lights that will light the larger open the larger open space, and then, bollard lights within the Bosque itself. We do know that we need to not have light spillage onto the north lot, so we do anticipate that the pole lights will have some shielding and direction to them. And then again, access to the DEP infrastructure is one of a critical element of the site. So ensuring that whatever the design is fits within the diagram that we coordinated. Okay, very quickly planting. We have 4 goals: neighborhood cohesion, sustainability and resilience, ecological benefits, and to reflect the creative spirit. We have 3 different planting zones based on shade and design intent. Our ground plane color palette is a little bit cooler toned. So we're looking at blues and purples, yellows and whites. I'm not going to read through all of these plants, but the intent is that there's a mix of ferns, grasses, bulbs, and perennials within this color palette. And then for the trees, we are proposing tree lilac and Persian ironwood, and for the vines, honeysuckle and trumpet creeper. And you'll see this breaks a little bit from the palette. And part of that is to also mimic what we're doing with the site furnishings and really pull the colors from the mural out into the planting as well with seasonality. And again, one of the main things we heard from the community was make it as green as possible. So in choosing the plants that we have been looking at, trying to provide green throughout the year through evergreens and grasses, but also provide some seasonal interest throughout the year as well. Okay. How am I doing on time? Okay. So just to wrap up, again, 5 main goals: really try to be as green and landscape forward as possible, make it as inclusive and welcoming as possible, and have flexible spaces through the large open space that can be broken down into smaller spaces, as well as the smaller spaces below the tree and umbrella Bosque. And I'm missing one, and I apologize. Inclusive, welcoming and inclusive. I'm sorry, whichever the 5th one is, also very important. I'm completely blanking. I'm sorry. Yes. Yep.
Before discussion, I just want to see if we have any testimony. Seeing no in-person testimony. Chelsea, do we have anybody signed up for remote testimony?
We do not have anyone signed up remotely. Is anyone within the Zoom room here to testify? If so, please use the raise hand feature. Seeing that there are no hands, we can proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea. Commissioners, if you have any feedback.
Good morning.
Morning.
First, I just want to, I'm really excited about this project. I'm really excited it's being developed. I live a little bit north of here. I walk by here several times a week and have never quite understood why the site is the way it is. I assumed it was just an abandoned industrial site from waterfront service. So That's great. I'm trying to get a better sense of how the mural is going to look in year 1 and then maybe year 5, year 10 relative to the umbrellas, but also the trees. Because it seems as though the mural is going to be truncated at the beginning and then just gradually not disappear, but become more and more covered, unless you're keeping it at the chin line here.
That is our goal. Our goal is to stay roughly below the chin line. The chin line is, if I remember correctly, 18 feet up in the air. And the intent also is that we are planting deciduous trees so that in the winter it is generally fully visible. So we are looking at a smaller tree for this basque, partially for the mural and partially just because we don't have the width for a really wide tree. Because we have to stay within that red zone.
Then, thank you for that. That's really helpful. And then the artist or artists who did that mural, what's their take?
Hi, I'm Samara Karasik with the Hudson Square Bid.
Well,
So we have been in close contact with City of School that actually put that mural up, and also the School Construction Authority. They're in the middle of a project right now where they're gonna repair part of the building. And everyone is like really on board with us making sure that mural stays good. My understanding is that SCA also has a plan to restore the mural if anything happens to it. And the community really expressed loud and clear, everyone wants to make sure this mural stays front and center. And I can just tell you from our perspective, we definitely want to keep it there too. It's beautiful. It's the biggest mural in New York City. We think it's really important to keep it there.
thanks, Sam.
Have a couple of questions and comments. First of all, congratulations. I think it's a very fun space. And it's great to see how, with such a challenging site, you've been able to figure out how to make it green, fun, flexible, all within a good balance. I just have a couple of questions, comments, parting from Bill's comments on the trees. You mentioned you're choosing a lower species. Is the parotia the one that you're planning to use here, or also the lilac?
We are planning on using both. So
Okay.
we're looking at interspersing them so we don't have a monoculture.
Okay.
But there will be, I believe the parotia will be more on the north and the lilac more on the south.
Okay. And the lilac, you're looking at the white flowered
Mhm,
lilac?
mhm.
Um,
Ivory silk, I think.
Okay. Lilacs tend to have a lot of offshoots, the way they grow. So I would just want to caution that from a public space perspective. If you have the proper maintenance bandwidth, great. But if not, yearly, they just like shoot little trees around them, and it just becomes a challenge with head clearances and things like that. So just be aware of that. Then looking at the next layer, which is the umbrellas, how high are the umbrellas being proposed?
The umbrellas are 9 feet tall. Yes, they're 9 feet tall at the point, and then they will come down probably about 18 inches. So 7.5 feet is probably the lowest point.
So basically they still sit underneath the shin of the
Yeah,
mural.
yeah, they're actually significantly below.
And are you thinking they're fabric? Are you thinking they're metal? You had different photos,
Yeah.
different, representations there.
Below, within the tree basket itself, we are imagining that they are marine grade fabric.
Mhm.
And then on the movable furnishings, we are looking at a metal option. The modulars, I'm
The
so sorry.
modulars.
The modular
Okay.
furnishings, we're looking at a metal option.
Okay. Because the mural is so strong and because you're having the planting also be such a strong character for the project, I find the fact that you have two types of umbrellas and the fact that they have a lot of colors perhaps be a little bit distracting or compete a little bit with the mural. So I would encourage you to look at maybe having just one type of umbrella throughout and maybe having just selecting one color. Like I believe all your furniture is that teal color. Maybe becomes a little bit more monochromatic so that we just let the mural be what it is. I think otherwise it might become a little bit busy. Given everything else that's going on the site, that's one thought. The other thought has to do with this exact rendering and kind of approach to the site. I see that you have the two heights of trellises based on their context. But when you look at it from this perspective, the trellises kind of create a gateway almost. And they kind of want to be symmetric in a way. They feel a little bit odd having one taller than the other. So I would look and see if there's a way to, think of them also as a gateway, as a pair in this, while also working independently. Because to me, when you look at them in plan, you don't see that relationship, but here it just becomes so strong. It's just something to consider. Other than that, I think it's a super fun project. I can't wait to see the Daydreamer. I've never seen that before, so it will be really fun to see how it interacts and how people embrace it. Thanks.
Similarly, I think it's so cool. And I was curious because often when Parks does projects right on their own, right, and for great reason, their signature elements, right, the standard 1964 World's Fair bench, and you have such a cool, innovative, very different kind of furniture and other things here. Are you able to do that because it's a multi-agency? Right.
Is a partner. Yes.
Got it. Well, thank you, BID, for being a partner,
Thank you,
because
BID.
it's so, yeah, it's so cool. And the Dreamcatcher too. I maybe have passed this a million times and not noticed it, although hard to not notice the mural. But maybe I have missed it, but I certainly would go on that Dreamcatcher to hear all those. Yeah, so it's just, I love it because it's so different. And it's so innovative, and it's just a really cool space that you could see in some of the great big cities all over the world, right? And here you're doing it here. So I think it's really cool.
Commissioner Lori, would you like to say something? Great.
Yeah, I just have a quick comment, just to say I'm also very excited about this. This is like a really great plan. And I love the plantings, everything. I know the one on Grand Street well, which is really welcome. And although it's very hot, so still. And so I think these shade devices are incredibly important. And I'm really happy that you're doing this. I think the whole plan, as I said, is very beautiful. I also, so the shade, I would encourage, as much as possible and make sure it really works, which I'm sure you have done. The umbrellas, I just wanted to note that I also have a concern with them because I think the mural is so beautiful and important to the neighborhood, as the community has acknowledged. And I find the colors just like, I don't understand why you have to take a mural and then repeat the color scheme. To me, I think let the park be the park, and then the mural is the mural. And I think I'm also concerned about the color, not just the color of the fabric, but that it's kind of lightish, and if fabric, it's going to look very dingy because everything is incredibly dirty in the city. So, and we're near the tunnel. So, I know everybody's mindful of that, but I would just tone them. I wouldn't have color, but that's my 2 cents. But otherwise, I'm very excited about the whole thing. So congratulations. Thank you.
Commissioners, additional questions, comments? All right, before we take a vote, I just have one question. The Daydreamer, is that your design, Michelle?
No, it is, I'm sorry, I can't go to it. It is done by Daily Tous les Jours, which is a art and design firm out of Montreal. This is their innovation. It's installed 2 other places in the United States, and I believe one is Illinois and one is North Carolina. So we do know it has been installed and done well. We can send a link to a video because it is much more easy to understand with a video, but it is done by Daily.
And is the sound produced mechanically, or is there some kind of device in there that
There is
plays?
a speaker, and then there is a brain elsewhere that is basically feeding information to it.
Okay,
So
interesting.
The actual bench is actually hollow and holds most of the infrastructure.
So who would be responsible for that? I mean, I guess if it doesn't play sound anymore, who cares? But like, can it listen?
What do you mean, listen?
Well, if it plays music digitally and the brains of it are somewhere else, like, is it like Alexa?
I do not believe so. The only data that I believe is recorded is the number of rotations per day. And it does the brains do look at how the two move together so that the sounds are either in sync or not in sync, but it's not necessarily recording anything from the outside world. There's no microphone. It's really just a speaker.
And who owns that? Is it the bid that's responsible for that? The bid. Okay. So it's your job to make sure that thing, yeah, got it. Okay. All right, but it doesn't, to your knowledge, have recording capacity. Okay, that's good to know.
And
Okay.
Daily also fabricates it. So they design and fabricate it, which is also helpful. So we can confirm, but it does not record.
Okay, great. All right. So in summary, before we take a vote, we just have a few comments. One regarding the maintenance of the tree lilacs, to just think about that, the colors, to consider the colors of the umbrellas. And Lori, unless you feel strongly about it, I don't know that that rises to the level of a condition. Okay, no, just to consider that. And then thinking about the trellises at the entryway and whether that becomes a gateway. And then finally, I just really want to go on record to say that this kind of collaboration as between two city agencies, DEP, DPR, and then the bid, to make sure that we optimize this kind of infill site is, we really applaud that. There's so many sites like this across the city that are underdeveloped. So I really want to go on record saying, good for all of you in doing this. Thank you. So with that, I will call the roll call vote on item 28896. Commissioners, when I call your name, please state your vote. Isabel Casilla.
Approved.
Lori Hawkinson.
Approved.
Bill Heinzen.
Approved. I just want to underline the consideration about the umbrella palettes.
Thank you. Carrie Maloney.
Approved.
Merrill Tish. Approved. Jimmy Van Bramer.
Approved.
And I also approve. So let the record show that all are in favor and the project is approved. And congratulations, beautiful project. Okay. The next public hearing item is 28897, preliminary review of the reconstruction of the Pelham Parkway Malls, Phase 2, White Plains Road to Stillwell Avenue in the Bronx. Per standard procedure, applicants will give their presentation, then public testimony will be heard, and then the commission will ask questions, deliberate, and vote. We will hear in-person testimony first, followed by testimony from remote participants, and we can now proceed with the presentation.
All right, good morning. I'm Nancy Prince from New York City Parks, and we're really happy to be here to present the Greenway and Pelham Parkway malls. This Greenway is an important connection between Pelham Bay Park and Bronx Park and has its roots in Olmsted's plans for parkways throughout the city that connect parks. In 93, Parks Department and DOT worked together and planned 350 miles of greenway, and this is one of them. So this is part of a bigger bike network. And we're very excited to have the funding to reconstruct this important amenity and make it safer, useful and enjoyable for all the many users. We include a lot of new canopy trees, which is great. So I'm going to turn it over to Rucha. Rucha Mandlik from QRP is going to present it. And we have a couple parks people and Mark Bonnell, the partner from QRP. Okay.
Thank you, Nancy. So, yeah, we are very happy to present this park at Pelham Parkway Malls. And is this working? Okay. And the goals here are to really upgrade the site furnishings and pavings at some of the north-south pedestrian crossings, one at Bronxwood Avenue and the other one at Seymour Avenue. And we are also going to reconstruct the Greenway path to improve safety and comfort for both pedestrians and cyclists. And while doing that, we want to preserve the historic character of the malls, the historic character as well as the landscape character. So we are aiming to plant about 125 trees in this new scheme. As you can see, the site is in the heart of the Bronx, going from Bronx Park to Pelham Bay Park. And we've divided the scope areas in different sections as we got funding. So they're not consecutively named. All scope areas are outside of stormwater risk. And the predominant land use here is residential. As Nancy mentioned, the inception of the Parkway malls started in the 1900s and they were developed over the years. And an important feature to note here is that the allays of trees. So elm trees were planted along westbound lanes and lindens were planted along eastbound lanes. A lot of the original trees have been replaced by other species, but you can still see the structure of the alley as you drive through or you walk on the greenway. So we have tried to maintain that and enhance it wherever and as much as possible. There are several parks in walking distances from the malls, but they mainly have recreational activities. This section of the parks, the Pelham Parkway malls, is really the unique green space that goes from west to east. And it's important to know, like Nancy mentioned, that the greenway system that goes through the malls is part of a bigger system called Mosholu Pelham Greenway that connects, it goes all the way to Van Cortlandt Park and then Pelham Bay Park. So our site is an important connector between the two. These are all the scope areas which we'll go through one by one. But before that, a quick note on the community outreach. We collected over 100 comments from online community input meeting and also an online survey that was put up after the meeting. And the overwhelming response from the community was to preserve the landscape, preserve the historic character. The community wanted to add even more trees and planting and wanted to minimize the paved areas. And they wanted some basic amenities like drinking fountains and ADA accessibility. But they also asked to repair the path, which is the Greenway path, and repave it. So that was also a priority. And then there were some comments about maintenance and security throughout the parkway. We've tried to address all of those in each section of the project. Now I'll start with Site A, which goes from Wallace Avenue to Lerting Avenue. And here we'll be doing the greenway of this entire length and then the the crossing path at Bronxwood Avenue. The existing conditions are pretty much the same throughout the length of the malls. You have a existing asphalt pathway, which is in poor condition. And there's a pedestrian and bike conflict because it's about 8 to 9 feet right now. But other than that, it goes through a very scenic landscape with old shade trees surrounding the greenway on both sides. Speaking of trees, we did an extensive tree inventory analysis, and we looked at the critical root zones and structural root zones of trees and see how far they go. And in the proposed design, we have tried to keep the pathway alignment pretty much the same so that we don't disturb any more tree roots and try to stay away from the structural root zones. In terms of species, you have the elms and the lindens, which are the LA trees, and then also oaks and honey locust and some evergreens like pines. So it's a diverse mix. These are some of the existing conditions. This is the crossing path that I'm talking about at Bronxwood Avenue. It has some benches right now and some light poles. Some photos of the greenway. And the schematic plan is very simple. We are proposing to widen the existing greenway to 10 feet, which is about 1 to 2 feet wider than what's existing. And it's also the minimum width that's safe for a shared use path, according to AASHTO. Ideal is 12, but because of the tree roots and our existing conditions, we are minimizing it to 10 feet. We'll also have some intermittent benches. We have located them so that they're always in shade. And then we're also adding some new trees and some shade trees and flowering trees. At Bronxwood Avenue crossing, we are proposing to repave the pathway. The width here will be the same. And we're also proposing new benches and some shade trees and flowering trees to fill in the landscape. And there's also going to be a water fountain here. The south side of this particular crossing path, our scope is only limited to reconstructing the pedestrian ramp to ADA standards. And in terms of planting, a strategy throughout the site is, again, filling in the LA trees wherever they are missing, and then also adding more shade trees near the benches and some flowering trees to sort of complete the landscape. Site B is, we're jumping to Seymour Avenue, which is further east. Here, we'll be redoing this crossing path that goes from south to north. Right now, it's not ADA accessible, and the asphalt pavement is in poor condition. But again, the views from here, the landscape, it's really scenic. And as you can see, there's also a desire line here, which people use to just cross over to go to that crosswalk because there's a bus stop right there. We studied the trees, looked at the tree root zones, species, and this is how it looks right now, where you can see the pathway that goes up on a hill. That's the existing bench, which is not usable. And this is the desire line that I was showing it in the drawings. So in this scheme, we are proposing a more meandering, like a gentle, wider pathway that connects the two, the south and the north side. And it will also have some game tables and benches. And by making it slightly wider here, we are incorporating that desire line and making it feel like a more social space. But at the same time, we are keeping this direct connection. We'll repave it as a new asphalt pathway for people who want to just quickly go across. And then, of course, adding some flowering trees and shade trees, filling in the LA trees. And this is a rough sketch of how it would look like. Site C is again at between White Plains and Wallace Avenue. And our scope here is limited to adding 2 new drinking fountains in this area. We are back to Greenway. Site D is going from Lurting Avenue all the way to Seymour Avenue. And like I mentioned, the existing conditions are pretty much the same. You have the asphalt pathway with some big shade trees. This is the tree analysis. Some of the trees are coming off because they are in poor condition. This is how site D looks like right now. And this is the schematic plan, where again, we are widening the pathway, adding some benches, and planting new trees. The last section is site E, which completes the project areas. And this one goes from Seymour all the way to Stillwell Avenue. And again, there's an existing greenway, lots of trees here. There are some newly planted trees here also. Some existing photos. And this is the scheme where it's consistent with the other parts, 10-foot wide pathway, benches, and lots of trees. And in terms of planting, we are just filling in here, particularly in this case, just filling in the LA trees wherever they are missing. And this is a schematic section of how we imagine the greenway would look like. Yes, yeah. And in terms of site materials, we are replacing what's already there. So like asphalt hex block pavers and city benches with wooden slats. So just replacing the existing. And throughout the greenway and the malls, it's a diverse landscape. So whatever we are proposing is our native species and what's already there. So we know that it works. And then we're also adding some flowering trees for seasonal interest. And that's it. I'm gonna go back to one slide and we'll take questions.
Before questions, I would like to ensure we don't have any testimony. I'm not seeing any in-person testimony. Chelsea, do we have anyone signed up for remote testimony?
No, we do not have anyone signed up remotely. Is anyone within the Zoom room here to testify? If so, please use the raise hand feature. I will give you 1 moment. Seeing no hands, it looks like we're okay to proceed. Thank you.
Commissioners? I want to commend what is a very contextually elegant and thoughtful and thorough restoration of, I know this community, and this is like a very important space for leisure. So it's wonderful that you're giving it the care that it deserves. Can we take a quick look at site B?
B?
Yes. Can you go to the plan and the rendering for B?
Yeah.
Yes, let's stop there for a sec. So I just want to make sure I understand. So the one that says new asphalt pathway is actually the current, that's not the current path does what? Can you just with your cursor?
It's roughly in the same location. So that's the,
Okay, got it.
goes
I see.
straight
Right,
over
right.
the hill.
So you're just sort of like expanding the width where it meets the right of way.
You mean the width of the pathway?
To make that, if you can go to.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes,
to
yeah.
incorporate the designer line. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm wondering, you had mentioned, and I think you have achieved this, that one of your goals here was to make sure it's a more social space and you've incorporated game tables.
Yeah.
I sort of have two questions about that. One is just, do you anticipate that maintaining that sort of like moon-shaped lawn would be difficult given the heat island effect of the asphalt all around it? And whether you consider just making it a kind of plaza space in general, given that there's so much lawn all around, like, did you consider?
So if you look at the planting diagram, it won't be lawn, it will
I
be
see.
planted. So we'll have some ground cover and shrubs here to sort of separate the, the sitting areas from this path. And then we are also adding some trees here to shade the space.
I see.
And yes, important point is this will be an ADA accessible path.
Got it.
Whereas right now there's just the direct path, which is not ADA.
And how wide is the that little lawn at its widest?
This lawn here,
Yeah,
it's about 12 foot
12 foot. So it
Yeah.
gets quite narrow in the
in the,
corners by the trees.
Ye-
Can we see the rendering, please?
Yep.
Yeah, there we go.
yeah.
Thought here, and I don't know if that's where you're going with this, is very difficult to maintain planting on such kind of tight corners. One, because there isn't a lot of soil, and two, because people tend to just cut them. I've seen successfully people place boulders in those corners. Prospect Park has been doing that quite a lot to deter people from cutting. And given that you have a lot of existing boulders in this area, could be something to consider to prevent those desired lines from
Mhm.
continuing to happen.
That is exactly what I was thinking about too, that I think those little corners, even you could put an oak leaf hydrangea there or whatever, just to, but it's not, this isn't your first time doing that kind of space, Nancy, so I'm sure you have thoughts about it.
I want to know if we could stay open to maybe doing it with shrubs or a low plant.
Oh, yeah, we're not, this is just like a question, that's all.
Because the big rock outcrops are big and
Yeah.
sometimes little ones can look kind of ditzy. But we'll look at the corner. We really did think about that with the planting. So we'll look at
Yep.
That's
doing
all.
something there.
Okay, so
I have a couple of comments and questions. The first one has to do with drinking fountains, and it's just something that's not super clear in your presentation. Here you have a rendering of the high-low, but the plan says high-low plus bottle filler, but the product cut sheet is the high-low and bottle filler. So I just wanted to confirm if there's different types throughout the project or only one type. Mostly thinking from the perspective that more and more people are bringing water bottles, and these being such a long corridor, we want to ensure we're
Yeah.
being sustainable from that perspective.
Yeah, so we did go, went back and forth, deciding which drinking fountain to go with. And this is high and low with bottle filler
Yeah.
was the final.
So this is what we're going to use
Yes.
everywhere.
Yes.
And we go back and forth because it's a little bit, this is for some maintenance people, this is a little harder to maintain, this 3-piece. But we ended up that we committed.
So that will be
here.
consistent.
That would be
Across the, yeah.
across the way.
Great. Then my other question comment, this was issued to you before, is about what is the edging for the asphalt path? On the responses, you mentioned that you're going to use the wood edging, which I guess is very similar to what Prospect Park does throughout. How does that fare over time? I'm just curious.
Do you know what? It leaves in we leave in a place. It's like leaving the formwork in place and it does disappear over time, but it's not retaining anything. We just have to have, careful grading next to it. If you try and build the path up too high, and then you have erosion, then that disintegrates. But we find it works really well. Central Park does it, Prospect Park does it.
And it has a long lifespan.
Yeah, as long as the asphalt.
That's why I'm asking, right?
Yes.
Asphalt, if it's not bound, eventually
Yeah.
starts corroding at the edges.
Yeah.
I've noticed New York City parks do the wood, but the wood also does.
Yeah. And the wood makes
fail over time.
the contractor thicken that edge. So, it gives them something to pour against, so it doesn't taper down, which you'll find the old asphalt paths, they would really crumble at the edges.
Okay.
So,
All right, so you have perfected that
Yeah.
detail over time. That's the extent of my comments.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the really only item we're just looking at is what to do at those corners
Okay.
inside the island. But we commend this very elegant restoration of what is a very important community landscape. And with that, I will take a roll call on item 28897. Commissioners, when I call your name, please state your vote. Isabel Casilla. Lori Hawkinson.
Approved.
Bill Heinzen. Carrie Maloney.
Approved.
Meryl Tisch.
Approved.
Jimmy Van Bramen.
Approved.
Okay, and I also approve. So let the record show that the project is approved. Thank you
Thank
very
you so
much. and
much.
Congratulations. Eight preliminary review of the reconstruction of the Plaza East of the Soldiers and Sailors Monument, including the installation of an ADA path, West 88th Street and Riverside Drive in Riverside Park, Manhattan. Please note, this project is located at a designated scenic landmark, and as such, the Landmarks Preservation Commission has issued an advisory report, and the Public Design Commission has reviewed this report. For standard procedure, the applicant will give their presentation, then public testimony will be heard, and then the commission will ask questions, deliberate, and vote. We will hear in-person testimony first, followed by testimony from remote participants. We can now proceed with the presentation.
yes, okay.
Good morning. I'm Sybil Young, Parks's Historic Preservation Officer, and I am joined by Lang Pugh from WXY Architects, who is the lead designer for this project. And Terry Berger is from ABB Landscape Architects is on the Zoom. Also Margaret Bracken, the landscape architect for Riverside Park. We are very excited to be here today at this point in our project for the Soldiers and Sailors Monument. This project has a long history of advocacy, and thanks to Councilmember Gail Brewer, the Riverside Park Conservancy, the New York Landmarks Conservancy, Community Board 7, the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Association, and Parks's Art and Antiquities Division, we received a substantial amount of funding from Mayor Adams and now can complete this project. We're here today seeking preliminary approval for modifications that are needed to provide barrier-free access to the monument. But before we dive into that proposal, just wanted to give you a bit of background on the larger scope and history of the project. So in addition to providing that barrier-free access, the project is a complete restoration of the entire monument. The monument has not seen any significant improvements since it was restored in 1962. In 2017, we completed a comprehensive condition survey and recommendations for the monument. So our design team is currently building upon that 2017 report to develop a full restoration plan. Some of the firms that were involved in the 2017 report are also part of our current design team. So we're really starting from a place with a team that has a great amount of knowledge about the monument. I should also mention it was approved unanimously by Community Board 7. And last month we presented at the Landmarks Commission where they voted unanimously to issue a favorable advisory report. So here is our site in Riverside Park at 89th Street. The restoration will be of the entire monument, the interior, exterior, terraces, steps, retaining walls, balustrades, and then again, providing accessibility to all levels. We do not have coastal flooding concerns here, nor street flooding issues. Not yet. We are located in a largely residential neighborhood, and here is our site in context with other park sites. Couple of historic images, this one from 1910. This one from 1934. This was taken before the railroad was decked over and really shows the prominence of the monument within Riverside Park. This is an image from 1911 and the same view today. You can see that the upper level is blocked off with fencing and no access is allowed due to the deteriorated conditions. This is a timeline of the monument's history, just some key points. It was completed in 1902 and dedicated to all of the soldiers and sailors of New York State for the Union cause. In 1930, there was some restoration work done. And then again in 1962, there was a comprehensive restoration. 1976, it was designated an individual landmark by the Landmarks Commission, and it is one of only a handful of monuments that are also individual landmarks. 2017, we completed that condition survey. The monument has remained largely unchanged since it was built. There are a couple of exceptions. At all of the terrace plazas, it originally had marble banding and herringbone brick. And in 1935, those brick pavers apparently having failed were replaced with concrete. Then in 1962, during that major restoration, all of that concrete was replaced with sandstone. That sandstone is in very poor condition currently, sandstone not being an ideal paving material. So we are actually proposing to go back to the original herringbone brick with an improved installation and new drainage system. The other change that took place in 1962 was all of the marble balustrades were replaced with limestone. And this is the restoration plan in very broad strokes. This is being submitted to the Public Design Commission under a separate application, but just wanted to touch on it today. The intent is to restore or replace in kind where restoration is not possible for all elements, the exception being that sandstone you see on the left here being replaced with the original brick pattern. The 2017 conditions assessment unsurprisingly found that most of the conditions were in fair to poor condition. The exterior needs 100% repointing. It will be cleaned, repaired, decorative elements restored or replicated. All of the bronze will be restored. The slab and subbase at all of the plaza levels dates to 1902 and is in need of complete replacement. So all of this paving is coming up. And then the interior will also be cleaned, restored, repointed. There's a mosaic floor that will be restored as well. So now we're going to go into that proposal for accessibility. This monument is really a significant landmark, not only for the community in which it sits. It's visited by veterans groups. It hosts the largest Memorial Day celebration for the city. So providing this accessibility, really can't be emphasized enough. Whenever we're dealing with providing accessibility to our landmarks, we are met with challenges. Here, those challenges are exacerbated by very steep grades and lots of stairs. And when the goals of this accessibility, when we set out, were really to provide a welcoming and equitable route to the monument, one that matched what people who could take the stairs were following. We didn't want to hide it. We wanted it to be clear as one approach that it was accessible, but then of course, balancing that with having a minimal impact on the historic fabric of the monument and also views to the monument. And that was the challenge we gave to our design team. We think they've done an excellent job with that. I'm going to turn it over to Lang from WXY, who's going to walk you through that plan and how we got there. Thank you.
I think this is on, right? Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Sybil. I'm going to go through a few slides to show site analysis of the existing conditions. This is a diagram to show the various grades that you find around the monument. It's much steeper along the west and to the north. There's an overall grade change in elements of the monument that reaches 15 feet. So that to highlight as a point of challenge for maintaining or providing accessibility for all levels. This is located at the intersection of West 89th Street and Riverside Drive. Primary approaches are from the east and from the south to the main terrace levels. The landscape around the monument is generally lawn at this time, not in very good condition because of the steep grades. And one of the more unusual features of the monument is that there are cannons to the south and cannonballs to the east, which is in that yellow section there. Just make sure I'm on the right slide. I think I skipped ahead one. Yeah. So some of the other site features observed are some areas of poor drainage. They're highlighted in the blue. Some significant shade trees, a cluster of ginkgos and a honey locust to the north and east. And the asphalt path, which is in orange, is in poor condition. The path that leads north into the park and west past the Belvedere. In the next slide, I'll explain the pieces of the monument using the terminology from the original drawings. There's the lower terrace first at the south with the upper terrace, which creates a secondary axial relationship to the flagpole, which is in the semicircular, surrounded by semicircular stair. The esplanade is what they referred to the terrace around the monument tower. And then there's a grand stair down to the Belvedere. This is a complete tree survey has been conducted, identifying health and critical and structural root zones of each tree. Going to be very careful about all of that. Survey of the existing railings and fencing. Not a lot of evidence of those features being a part of the original monument. And then here's a elevation view to sort of explain the different levels further. So you can see down on the far left side, the lower terrace, followed by the upper terrace, then the esplanade around the tower, the north approach, and the Belvedere on the side. This is a view as you approach from axially from West 89th Street. The flagpole straight ahead and a path to the north on the right. This is the view from the south, the view number one, lower terrace. And then this is the view of the path to the west of the monument complex. There's a granite retaining wall. And then this is the path leading north to the east of the monument, looking north first, and then partway down the path, looking back south. You see the cannonballs on the right. That path continues to an intersection with a fork to the left, which is west, leading to the Belvedere, and then the path up north through the park to the right. At that intersection, there's a triangular cobble feature so that the asphalt creates a kind of triangular intersection. This is the path leading to the Belvedere. You can see that its condition is quite poor and that there's some trip hazards in the way it was originally installed. So as Sybil noted, we wanted to create a parallel and equitable path to reflect the main formal sequence of travel through the monument. And also in the interest of making it obvious and clear how that this is now accessible, we brought it to the side facing Riverside Drive. The other reason for that is the side to the west is a very significant grade change, which would have required significant structural enhancements in order to do anything. The path to the Belvedere, there's really no way to make that elevation change without taking advantage of the path that runs through the park that we just showed photos of. And here's the solution. At a high level, our approach was to take a park landscape approach to this. So we reduced the amount of actual ramp conditions, which are the 1 in 12 slopes that code requires for accessibility. The reason being is that ramps come with it all sorts of other requirements, such as handrails and wheel stops and things like that. So we fought hard to come up with a solution that could work with less than 5% slopes for a majority of the transitions. I'll get more into detail. We'll zoom into this later, but basically we're saving the trees to the northeast, and we're developing a landscape that allows for a park path to take you to each of the upper levels. And as mentioned before, using the path to the east to get to the Belvedere. This is looking again at fences and railings. The blue is showing in the landscape portion of this project, the introduction of railings. Gives you, as I mentioned before, you can see here that quarter circle path there. That's obviously a ramp because it's got railings on it. That's the only place where we weren't able to make the less than 5% sloped walkway work for us. Basically, it starts from the south. You take a very shallow walk up to that last bay of the baluster. We remove the balusters in that last bay, preserving the pylon and the pilaster in the railing. You enter into the lower terrace there. Then there's a short ramp that takes you up to a new landing that we've created that extends the upper terrace level out towards West 89th Street, and then installed new stairs in front of that landing extension. The path that goes through the landscape up to the Esplanade level is carefully designed to allow for grade changes that will work with planted slopes and getting the length that we need to get under 5%. Here's the grading plan that we're developing. And here's the approach to the planting. You can see the intensive planting around the paths that we're adding for the 3 first terrace levels. The planting underneath the shade trees is going to be a lawn area. And then where there's steep slopes that are difficult to maintain currently, we're going to recondition them and plant slope stabilizing ground cover. So here's a zoomed in view of the actual work that we've done to get these paths to work. You can see highlighted in red the 2 sections of the baluster railing that we've removed. It's in this section here and on the lower terrace. The upper terrace extension, we've shifted the stairs essentially about 14 feet to the east in order to create a connection point so that this path can be a continuous experience from one terrace to the next. So just a few quick sections to show the before and after. This is taken, as you can see in the plan up there, through the planted area. It's already mounded, but we're going to have to mound it more to get up to the level. This actually ends up being cut through that little connecting stair that we've inserted. You can see the intermediate path or walkway and then the upper walkway. Then over by the honey locust, this is the existing grade and the proposed. We're introducing tree well edging that will create an arc around the west side of the tree to allow us to get this to work. Mentioned before the cannonballs, we are relocating them because the regrading of the area doesn't really work with them in their current location. And so we're proposing to reinstall them inside that cobble triangle at the intersection of the paths to the northeast of the monument. Then another big intervention is the path that runs past the Belvedere. We're essentially fixing all the trip hazards and reinstalling new material as required. Materials that we're using are all going to be informed by existing park conditions in the vicinity and elsewhere. The park railing that we're proposing is used throughout Riverside Park. It's the stanchion is a flat bar and the handrail is a round pipe painted black. It's steel. And that will be used for that short section of ramp and at the stairs. Bluestone pavers are replaced in kind. All the other materials are based on existing materials around the monument or on the monument. The plants, we're taking a sort of native and adapted plant strategy. This is a preliminary take at the ones we're proposing. Woody plants, grasses, some evergreens, and some other perennials, flowering perennials. I'm going to go walk through a few before and after images. This is from the southeast of the monument, existing, and this is the proposed. We're going to walk through at pretty much at eye level for various locations to explain how this works. So this is from the south, and this is proposed. You can see the new landing, extension here, the stairs and that quarter turn ramp. This is generally in the position of where that landing extension is. And this is the proposed. This is the view looking at the current mound around the east and north that wraps around the east and north side of the monument. There was a large tree here that fell down a few years ago, which is why this wall has this unusual shape. And this is what's proposed. We've elevated the view so you can see the route of the path. We've introduced this stair here to make the path itself not so sole purpose, to try to lock it into the park in general and to provide an outlet for people that are maybe using the path as a walking path. Oh, by the way, we're using minimal path width, mostly because of the space available. We have a 5-foot wide path that where it can widens to close to 6 feet, like up at the top. And this is a view from across Riverside Drive and the proposed. And that's the end.
Thank you so much. I will check if we have testimony. Do we have any in-person testimony? Seeing none, I will move to remote testimony. Chelsea, do we have anybody signed up for remote testimony?
We do not have anyone signed up remotely. Is anyone within the Zoom room here to testify? If so, please use the raise hand feature. I will give you one moment. Seeing that there are no hands, it looks like we're okay to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea. Go ahead, commissioners.
changing population within the neighborhood and the turnover in all those buildings. I love this project. It would be something that my generation would probably prefer, right? That I would relate to. And the restoration, the whole thing is just stunning. But how do they, with limited resources, how do they choose this project from others? Just curious, where does that happen?
We're going to hand you a mic.
Well, we're pleased that it has been funded, but that was an effort of many people whom Sybil mentioned at the outset of her presentation. Local officials, community at large, veterans community. It represents, I think, 1 out of every 5 people who enlisted in the Union cause were from New York State. More than 12,500 people died. You know, the numbers are astonishing. Right. Well, it's the right thing to do. Sometimes you just have to do the right thing. Then maybe that's the answer. And the mayor, to his credit, has placed money in the budget for doing that. So.
So I too think this is really important to do. I don't know if that makes me older, but I do think it's very important to maintain our monuments. I was just in DC for the July 4th holiday weekend. And, it's just really important stuff. Right? How long has it been fenced off there?
I
The
would
big.
defer to,
Right. And how much is the project again?
yeah.
62 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a significant investment, but I think it's important. And I'm glad you're doing it. I'm glad the city's finally taking it up.
As Sybil mentioned, we'll be back to present the actual conservation approach. It's in very bad condition. I mean, not just the walking surfaces, which obviously create a daily trip and fall risk, but the building itself and many of the railings around it are showing stress, not just material wise, but they're shifting and things are, so it's urgent if this is to be preserved to do this now.
Once it's restored, can you gain access at all?
You can access the inside. It is possible to access the inside. I didn't mention this before. We are not providing accessible access to it. However, because it would require, there's a 2-foot elevation change between the esplanade and the interior, and there'd be no sensitive way to do that with the way the steps are configured around the monument. Monument has a kind of curve all the way around it, and then the first piece of, should try to use the images to help explain this. And then there's a base molding that is essentially a seat that goes all the way around it. And then you can see these steps up into things. So we decided that since the Parks Department would only ever provide very limited access to the interior for special events, that in those occasions that you would use a deployable ramp of some sort rather than altering the fabric.
So when there is public access or entry, you would make sure that it was accessible.
Yep.
Through those temporary measures.
Yes. Yep. It's just very rare. It's not done as a regular event. So
I'm sure, but is it again, once restored, remarkable inside and is the.
yeah, it's a very strange building, I have to say, because it is very small. It's a huge building, a very small interior. There are no stairs. There's no way to get, and this is one of the challenges with having to maintain it, is that there's no way to get up without scaffolding. Here's the dome that you can see. There's a dome with an oculus and then an upper dome. It's quite spectacular.
So you envision having cocktail parties and the.
fundraisers.
It's really tiny. It's a, yeah,
It's much smaller in this room. So
So no fundraisers for the park, for the money.
well, very special fundraiser, one person. Yep.
Bill,
Thank you. I agree. This is a really beautiful project, and I'm really glad that you are doing this. When I walk by here, it feels like you're in the Warriors almost, because it's just this seemingly abandoned and decaying project. And I think that's really important in and of itself to the neighborhood, to not have something that looks like something abandoned. But to Commissioner, I have two questions. One, to Commissioner Tish's point. I think what she was asking was about how does this engage the community and people from younger generations who war memorials are less in their kind of vocabulary. And the second question was, if that's a fair characterization of what you're asking. And secondly, I'm a little confused by the treatment of the cannonballs. I understand you have to move them, but it's sort of a circle of cannonballs, it looks like.
Yeah.
And I think there was yeah.
Oh, you want to, I'll go to rendering.
Let's see the rendering, yeah.
What?
Okay.
Yeah, we've basically just taken the exact count there and figured out a way to make it make sense within this location. They are, it's a little hard to tell, but they are partially sunk into concrete, and we would be doing the same thing here. This is a really funny feature. My wife grew up in the neighborhood, and she remembers as a child just doing the balancing act on these things. It seems like everyone really values these. It's kind of like a skills challenge for toddlers. And so
yeah.
Yeah.
Attractive nuisance. Okay.
Anyway, the community was very interested in us not losing them. So we developed this as a solution to keep them on the site.
But are you on Cannonball still?
Yes.
Okay.
Did you go, are you going, Bill, or do you want me to?
I just wanted to also give him an opportunity to answer the first part of my question about community engagement, but if we're on Cannonballs, why don't you go do Cannonball?
It just makes me think of Kusama, right? That's now like a Kusama piece, because people are walking throughout the balls, right? It's not sort of just a stack of cannonballs. You've sort of created a Kusama piece there, right? For people to walk in and out and interact, maybe not have little kids balancing on top of them, but actually interacting with them and walking through them.
Yeah, that's definitely possible, because that's a half circle, right? It becomes it becomes a very small circle when you turn that number of cannonballs into a small circle. So they've been spaced a bit.
But I guess I'm saying, unless you created, safe walkable pathways through it.
We should look at that. Yeah.
Just to speak to the community engagement and, why this project, I think if you were to sit here all day, one day, and see the different groups of people who are coming here, whether they know what they're looking at or not, there are exercise classes, people doing all kinds of activities on the plaza. There's Shakespeare in the Park every year at the Belvedere. So I think, obviously it is a major veterans draw, but I think as far as just anyone who visits the park or lives near the park sees this as a major landmark. The community board has a number of younger folks on it these days, and everyone was just so supportive. Margaret, I don't know if there's other events that take place there that you probably know best, but.
I just agree with you. It's just about Margaret. Just to reinforce the fact that there is a constant stream of daily events there. It's much loved by the community and used in ways you couldn't possibly imagine.
Okay. Let me just try to ask the question one more time. Will there be programming that specifically engages people in the community, people who visit the area about the intent and purpose of the structure?
I think yes, moving forward. I think restored. I mean, at the moment, we haven't really encouraged engagement beyond the Memorial Day events. And because of its closure and everything, you know, there hasn't been an opportunity to do that. I mean, this is going to bring enormous focus to this wonderful, you know, jewel in the crown of our park. So yes, I think the Riverside Park Conservancy, in conjunction with the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Committee, who are very actively involved in this, I think we'll look at doing interpretive signage, and I think we'll also look at engaging the community, educating the community to the benefits of it. And also opening it, we always used to open it for Open House New York, but I've been unable to do that. So we'll go back to doing that. And I think we'll have additional opening events, you know, just to really sort of show it off once completed.
When we come
Thanks,
back with
Margaret.
the conservation, we'll show you some details that we've done some research on and the meaning behind the selection of those carvings and things like that. So I think there's a great opportunity to have what's there become more transparent.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
So one more comment. First of all, I want to acknowledge that this is a very challenging site, and I really appreciate the fact that you're trying to work with grading to minimize ramps and handrails. So fully acknowledged. I do have to say that I find this path here, this curvilinear path, it's geometry. It's a little bit complicated in comparison to the geometry of the monument and the geometry of the other paths in a way that almost feels like it doesn't quite belong there. And also a geometry that may be a little bit difficult to navigate for people with disability, especially people rolling themselves on a wheelchair, because it has a lot of turns. So just wanted to ask you, given the walkway is 3.3%, and we have a little bit more percentage to give, have you explored trying to make it a little bit more of a simple, generous curve as opposed to the meander, just to try to ease the geometry a little bit?
I should let Terry, if she can weigh in on this, but I do want to note that, yeah, the slope does allow for us to tighten it up a bit. But this generated the first curve, and then this distance is one of the biggest slopes that we have to accomplish, and we also have to get this far over because of the slope from here to here, because we want to make sure that this doesn't get buried, because this is lower than this. So we're really kind of trying to find the perfect middle for these things, but I'll let Terry, her team was the one who worked out this precise grading.
Hi, everybody. Yes, we did look at numerous other geometries for the layout. Part of what happens here is it really has to do with the grading scenario, and it has to do with the location of the existing tree that we're trying to preserve. That really dictated a lot of it. And our feeling was, I understand what you're saying. If you start to flatten out some of these curves, well, there's two things. One, not going to be able to simplify it into sort of one complete curve. And if you start to flatten it out, it starts to really not work from a grading perspective. And you know, this is where we ended up. Could we tweak it a tiny bit? We could, but a lot of this has to do with the placement of entry points, including the new stair. And as I said, working around the existing tree.
One thing I would add, which I failed to mention before, we wanted to arrive here as part of the sort of equitable arrival point, being as close. We had originally tried to land here, but we couldn't get the grading to work if we were launching from here. And so we would have had to choose a path that was completely separate, and we felt like that would be negative. The other thing is the grade drops off significantly to the north here. So we were somewhat restricted with how far this could go. I mean, obviously we could go further and, you know, straighten things out possibly, But there's a lot of constraints is what it comes down to.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean,
Yeah.
you can spend months on this
Yes.
all alone. I just worry a little bit. One, there's the aesthetics of the geometry being kind of not as clean as the monument, but I do truly worry about the turning radius of someone coming up on a wheelchair at that moment where you kind of turn back. So again, maybe if there is a little bit of room in the grading, could that become a larger, perhaps not plaza, but like a larger space that makes that turn less challenging, less sharp? Just something to consider, because it's not the same.
I think we should widen the path there essentially.
Yeah,
so that-
widen it, make it
Yeah.
less sharp, think about someone on a wheelchair having a little bit less
Yep.
tight tolerance, let's say, coming up.
I think the plan view of, I mean, this is tough because you've got this very formal, historic context, but my hope is that with the planted mound, that what you read is more of the not the path, but rather the grading. And so I think some of this, I take all of your points, and we will work on refining it. But I think to a certain degree, this whole side will read more like a field and less like a snake path in a field. I hope.
Lang, I want to echo what everyone else has been saying about the elegance of this landscape, and also in particular, in my view, your landscape approach to the accessibility, which was particularly challenging on this site. I'm wondering, I was wondering sort of along the same lines as Isabel's comment, if you could just speak to the rationale for the new stairs, given their proximity to the other stairs.
Yeah, go back to the plan. We had originally wanted to actually have a sloped walkway that connected from this level. Once we had that idea in our head, we felt, when we couldn't get it to work from a grading standpoint, we felt like, take this away, and this just feels like a path that isn't really connected to anything. It's not connected to the park. It is connected to the upper terrace, but it's not connected to the park. Then it was where to place it. And unfortunately, with this all rising as it goes, this became the one place where we could really get it to work. I think, to be honest, there's work to be done on the actual shape of this, but we feel pretty strongly that having this not be so sort of singular in purpose emphasizes the sort of truly equitable aspect of providing this access. So it's that's why that's there. We did look hard at this, and it just felt too disconnected from the overall context.
Because you feel that the connection to the ground plane, not having to enter the monument itself, is important.
Yeah, well, the other thing is that it also worked out that it would actually sort of set up a view to make you understand where this is. I mean, I think the main thing is it's a very, if you're here and you have a whole bunch of people coming this way, it just would feel kind of challenging. Or let's say you're here or whatever. This just gives you an outlet. It's like another option for changing your mind or approaching somebody who wants to enjoy the plantings might just come up this way and walk along here to get to the upper level. It's just a way to sort of lock it more into the overall surroundings of the park, as opposed to just having it be a solution for people that need assistance to get to the upper level.
Do you think if that were not present there, would you change anything about the geometry of the walkway?
You might be able to flatten this a little bit, but it's really mostly about the elevation change from here to here. I can't remember, Terry, in the version without the stair, if this looked significantly different. No, she's still there.
I think a lot of us thought the stair was a positive, that it brings other people to enjoy this different kind of landscape. But I think we'll just take a quick look and see if there's other things we can do. You know, I was thinking maybe this could flatten out and maybe that would make it all look a little less twisty. But I know they've worked a lot on it. We saw many iterations. We wanted to reduce the walls so it would disappear. So one of the big goals was to not have this have a cheek wall, so it would be exposed. So that when you're looking, you just see green.
That's true. I forgot that we originally started with a
Yeah,
bunch
they
of
had-
low walls and everyone agreed that it was starting to do exactly what we were trying not to do, is have a sort of structured path as opposed to a landscape.
But I think we can take what you said about it being very wiggly and maybe widen a little portion of it or think about straightening one section.
Or even like just a very generous curve, because the other two, do have these curves that echo the type of geometry that the monument has. So is there a way where you can just offset the upper curve to the lower portion of the path?
Well, I know they looked at that and that's where we had a lot of wall.
I think the reaction was when we tried to flatten this out, that you really are kind of constrained here. And then this looked sort of on its own, didn't really, it was hard to get a big gesture to mesh with this.
I think that was your first instinct to do that. And you tried that and it ended up having a lot of walls and too much impact on that tree. But it's worth, we'll look, as we go do construction documents. And let them find detail.
Thank you. Commissioners, any additional comments or questions? Okay, so with that, I'll just summarize to say that we all applaud this resourcing of what is a very important historic landscape and the elegant work that you have done and your firm has done, Lang and Parks, in coming up with a landscape solution and bringing it into the present day. So two things we would just ask you to look at, and this is really for Parks, just the plan for access, temporary access for the monument itself. And the second is to consider the geometry of the walkway in the context of the very axial and traditional geometry of the monument itself. So with that, I'll call the roll call vote on item 28898. Commissioners, when I call your name, please state your vote. Isabel Casilla.
Approve.
Lori Hawkinson.
Approve with conditions.
Oh, she's dropped off. Okay. Bill Heinzen.
Approved.
Carrie Maloney.
Approved.
Merrill Tisch. Approved. Jimmy Van Bramen.
Approved.
And I also approve. So let the record show that approval is unanimous and the project is approved as presented. Thank you and congratulations on the project. Thank you. Turn and commence with the committee meeting at 12:15.
I also just wanted to clarify, we did catch Lori's vote. She did vote to approve. you, everybody. We're going to get started. Team, let me know if we're live. Chelsea, we're good?
Yes, we're good.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, okay, everyone, we're back from break. We'll now begin the committee meeting, starting with preliminary review. Is that right? Okay, preliminary review of the construction of a waterfront park at Pier 6 in Bush Terminal Industrial Campus adjacent to Marginal Way in Brooklyn. We will not hear public testimony or vote on this project today. Welcome and begin with.
Thank you. Good afternoon, commissioners and attendees. I'm Gail Rothstein from EDC. We are very pleased to be bringing you another wonderful project at Bush Terminal, providing waterfront access. Your presenters today are Rebecca Fishman from Arcadis and Pippa Brashear from Scape. Thanks.
Okay. Should I go back? Okay. Okay, so our agenda today is to talk about the purpose, goals, project location, existing conditions, community engagement, and schematic design for the pier. New York City EDC plans to stabilize Pier 6. Pier 6 is a unique pier, and that's a 5-acre filled pier adjacent to Bush Terminal campus. We want to create a safe environment to facilitate accessible public space and access to the water where there is none now. It is a site with a rich and active both industrial and ecological history. And we are envisioning it to serve as a new waterfront public open space, both for folks that live there, people who are going to work at Bush Terminal and surrounding sites, and also for visitors to the area. So we have a bunch of good goals, both for design and for our program. We want the pier to be safe and accessible. We want it to be engaging and flexible. And by that, we mean we want to have flexible spaces that are multi-use and can connect people with the water to both learn and interact with the water. We want it to be ecological and industrial. So I talked a little bit about the history, but we want it to really reflect that history and build upon it. We want it to be sustainable and adaptable. We want to design a pier that is adaptable to the changing environment. By that, I mean climate change. And we also want it to be implementable and maintainable. So we want to implement the design goals cost effectively and create a low maintenance redesigned pier by 2026. For the program, we really want multi-use flexible gathering spaces. These gathering spaces will be lawns, plazas, seating, and other areas that you've seen. We want to have parks and boardwalk, paths and boardwalk, sorry. We want to create, basically what we want to create on the pier is accessible parking, natural planted areas, and a water viewing and interaction stations. We have a hypothetical idea and a conceptual idea for what those look like now, and we are just refining that on the pier, but we do want to make sure that all those programs and design goals are reflected in our final design. The project location, the pier is in the borough of Brooklyn. It is in the community of Sunset Park, and it is directly adjacent to and in front of the Bush Terminal campus. I'll walk through some existing conditions. Here you'll see the whole constellation of where the pier exists within the community, all the transportation stops, all the waterfront uses, and some of the local businesses and industrial sites around the pier. Specifically wanted to call out the Bush Terminal North and South Campus.
the Sims Municipal Recycling Center, the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, the Equinor offshore wind site, Industry City. Basically, as you can see here, Pier 6 fits into a wide and booming and newly revitalized Brooklyn waterfront. South Brooklyn waterfront. Here we're looking at the adjacent public open spaces. So there's closest is Bush Terminal Piers Park. Then there is a arc of playgrounds within a short radius of the park. And then there are larger open spaces further afield. So you'll see Sunset Park is pretty far away. And then the Greenwood Cemetery is also kind of beyond our walk shed here. So the need for this pier as public open space is clear and critical. We're looking here at traffic. The closest city bike storage is around a 5-minute walk, as is the closest bus station. There's a ferry landing around 20 minutes away, and then the closest subway stop is around 13 minutes away. And here we're looking we're zooming into where the pier is in relation to both the campus and the existing piers, Pier 7 and Pier 5. These are the buildings of the Bush Terminal campus and surrounding Industry City. And here is our existing condition site plan. You can see that most of the pier right now is a cement and dirt surface with emerging vegetation. And what we've done is looked at using around a 50-year useful life of the pier, how it can be adaptable to climate change and sea level rise. So we're looking specifically at the 2080 sea level rise. We're going to make sure that the elements of the pier are sustainable to that level of daily inundation. And here we've just mapped the heights of the pier to different storm and tidal scenarios. And here we're looking at infrequently flooded, occasionally flooded, routinely flooded, and future intertidal and intertidal today. And all those areas like accessible paths and parks and those areas that need to be used daily will be above that mean high water in 2080s. So meaning they were not expecting daily tidal flooding or even frequent tidal flooding, but these would be infrequently flooded areas. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague.
Can you guys hear me with that? Does that work? So we have actually looked at, it is a pier. We'll get to some photos in a minute because you've probably never seen it before because it's not accessible now. It was a structure, hard paving, but there's emergent vegetation that has just volunteered over time. Most of that is sort of thickety, invasives. Only about 50% of the vegetation is native, but there are over 700 trees as identified as about 1 inch caliper diameter or diameter breast height. Most of those are pretty small, but there are some nice native species, and the design is intended to kind of respond to these areas and preserve what we can while still stabilizing the pier. This kind of gives you a more broad overview. The other thing that is, in addition to this emergent vegetation, there's a lot of remnant industrial relics, sort of old foundations, rails, emergent walls. And while these kind of create a constraint for the design, we've also really seen them as an opportunity. And that's something that we've heard from EDC and the community is when we make this into a park, we don't want to lose this sort of wild emergent nature and this post-industrial past and want to celebrate that. I would be remiss to not mention that it provides amazing views of the harbor, as you'll see in a couple clicks. So people can't get to this waterfront now. And Rebecca mentioned this but it's worth mentioning again. We call this a pier, but it is filled ground. It is a filled pier. So we're not on structure. This is looking back at the Maiden Bush Terminal campus, right? So it really will be kind of a porch, a front door to that. And this is the sort of a view of the south shoreline of the pier. This is what a lot of the edges look like now. So when we say eroding, this is why we need to stabilize it. The edge portions were platform in structure and they have deteriorated and are falling into the water, but provide a pretty interesting and exciting form. As we said, emergent vegetation, right? The pier was totally paved. There are paved areas, but we've seen a lot of like pretty wild emergent trees and shrubs. And just to look at some of the more stabilized edge and a window into that like great view out to the harbor as you kind of emerge from being immersed. And this really iconic view of Lower Manhattan, but also want to highlight, we talk about the industrial history here. This is South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, right? Our future offshore wind port. So we're really part of the industrial future as well. But this is the end, a lot of sort of interesting views of what's out there, but also really as being more exposed is eroding. So, the need to stabilize, but the really need to kind of use on some of these relics of industry as inspiration and things that we keep, like the sort of location of the rail transport that got out into the pier. Really looking at some of the paved areas, you'll see a lot of our main circulation sits over this to minimize new impervious surface and respect existing vegetation. And really taking some inspiration from this cracking, eroding edge. We need to stabilize it and clean it up, but how can we keep some of that material as well as the look and feel of that in there? And then I'm biased, I'm a landscape architect, but just really kind of being inspired by the emergent vegetation, which is something we've heard reiterated by some of the environmental organizations and groups. And on that note, there has been a really a good bit of community engagement. It really started not with just a big public meeting, but focused, targeted conversations with a number of local stakeholder groups that have been doing activities in Bush Terminal Park or new businesses in the area. And that really fell into kind of 4 main buckets. Local government, EDC had a lot of conversations there. Organizations in Sunset Park like Uprose and others who have been pretty active. Environmental and advocacy organizations like the Billy and Oyster Project, Waterfront Alliance that are invested in waterfront parks, and have even the Billy and Oyster Project does have a community reef here, as well as local businesses and concerns about access and use, but also how their tenants might use the site. But we did have a series, we've had 2 larger public meetings. The first in February of this year, we did go with 3 very high level concepts, but it was really more about identifying and prioritizing the program and got a lot of good feedback. We were able to tease out trade-offs. And what we really heard was, creating some opportunity for access to nature, maintaining some of that wild, but also having some open, flexible lawns, particularly flat or gradually sloping lawns, as Sunset Park is very hilly. Plenty of spaces for community activities, community vendors, and a pretty strong desire not for the pier to be a parking lot or have a lot of parking. And just this was a survey that extended before and after that first town hall, really helped kind of prioritize the goals, this issue of creating a safe and accessible public space, and these varied spaces for gathering and relaxing, I think is the things that have really bubbled to the top in terms of use, and a desire for interaction with the water. The second town hall, which we actually just held, it feels pretty recently, last month, had a lot of the same feedback, but a pretty big emphasis on multi-generational spaces for local vendors to be, and a lot of questions about ensuring that like community use and events could use the space. So that's been a really focus of designing for flexibility. So with that, I'll dig into the design and we can, jump back if there's any questions. But I think that grounding and understanding where we're coming from really has informed the design. So as you kind of move out, this is the Bush Terminal, Made in Bush Terminal campus. We did retain 3 accessible parking spaces for immediate access to the campus, but the rest of the parking is removed. It begins with a very large entry plaza that ties into the interior space in the campus, but provides a really flexible space. It can accommodate food trucks as for vendors, but it's surrounded by a sort of lifted grove and shaded more seating areas to allow people to sit and gather around that. You move through the sort of middle portion of the pier, which is a little more densely vegetated with pockets of programs like this Playful Pockets, and one of our real, I think, features of the park, which is the tide pool area. I'll dig into it a little more. And as you come out of that, really a series of interconnected lawns that are gently sloping and allow for a variety of different seating and gathering opportunities, as well as sort of views out to Lower Manhattan and shade from the south. The last sort of quarter of the pier is really reserved for that habitat. It's where we're seeing, if you saw in the existing, a lot of the emergent vegetation and looking to maintain that with a light touch intervention of boardwalks to allow people to move through it, but really maintain access to that emergent nature. And this bird's eye, I think, gives you a little bit of a better view of the planting strategy and the dynamism of the edge condition that we're trying to create. This is looking at the south side with the tide pool area in the foreground. And to dig into that, I'm just going to go through a couple of the key spaces. Feel free to stop me with questions. We can also dig into any of the spaces I don't zoom in on. So again, the entry plaza is designed to, really be pedestrian, multi-use, but provides vehicular access to allow sort of food trucks in. We have pocketed shading areas for seating to really offer shaded seating and a variety of uses for people to spill over from tenants on the campus as well as the community. This sort of smaller pocket area and lifted grove allows a little bit of a view north and more sort of separated flexible space. But the idea is sort of a more urban welcoming center to the campus. And then just get an eye level view of that. And then, you move through this central area, which is more planted. And one of the key features that we've designed in is this tide pool area. There was a real desire to get down to and interact with the water, but we wanted to make sure we were doing that safely because there is boat traffic and things around here. And so you get an accessible path that descends to a gravelly cobble beach, the area kind of shown in brown, and in the white and gray, an area that is actually inundated at high tide, but allows us to capture and hold water in tide pools as the tide recedes. So people have a toes in the water moment opportunity, as well as a space to sort of engage with interactive habitat. And I think there's a lot of interest in local environmental groups and school groups kind of using this for environmental education too. And this kind of just gives you that cross section. So this will be one of the areas where we are cutting. I mentioned, as Rebecca mentioned, the real majority of the pier is at 7 or above. It's above mean monthly high water in 2080, no chronic flooding. This area, is really designed to be inundated a little more regularly over time as part of that design. And this is a view down that ADA accessible route into the sort of beach and tide pool area. Lawns. We got a lot of input and feedback from stakeholders about lawns. People really want, a place to sit, to gather, to have birthday parties, to view the water, but also have shade. And so we've really designed these to be a series of interconnected lawns that allow for, larger gathering space, but allow people to have smaller gathering and constant access to shade and pockets. This is, just less than 5%. It's a gradually sloping lawn with flat moments at the high points and low points down to the water. And we do have on the north side, this get down that's labeled that kind of comes off the end of the lawn. We'll show that in a moment. So again, the lawns are lifted, but given the space provides really gradual accessible routes down, but gets us lifted out for really good views and a little more soil planting volume for those trees. This is a view with the get down in the foreground. So this get down is really oriented looking up at Lower Manhattan and the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. But you get a view of the main lawn area looking back. Finally, the area we want to kind of dig in and show you is that woodland boardwalk area. So this is a combination of new plantings and managed restored plantings of what's there. There'll be sort of two main boardwalks that get you out to vantage points on the pier. The main north one is pretty much giving you that view that I showed earlier of Lower Manhattan, and the one to the south will look south towards Bush Terminal Park.
this area where the boardwalks were previously paved. So we will excavate and put new soil and more dense plantings there. But in the sort of background further away, will really be more of a strategic restorative treatment to what's there. This kind of gives you that view and feeling what it'll look like to kind of come out of that more forested area and into the waterfront. Lighting, the pier will be lit along main circulation routes to provide access. We're not planning to have heavy use at night, but there's people were keen to make sure that it would be safe and accessible. People would feel safe, and it will also be patrolled space. Materials and furniture. So one of the things that we've mentioned a lot is being inspired by the industrial materials that are there, but also active reuse of materials as part of the design. For this paving strategy really illustrates a continuous, a uniform paving on that main circulation path for orientation and accessibility, but really creating a new, allowing the paving material and some of the different specialized areas that I've talked to you to change and be different, to be a little more engaging and unique. And so looking at in the main path as a sort of cast in place concrete or unit pavers, exploring in some of the other pockets, stabilized stone dust, even integrated with some of the reclaimed concrete. And we're working really carefully and exploring options for reuse of materials here. Similarly, looking at opportunities for reclaimed timber from the building in benches. So this is kind of the aesthetic being driven by that we're looking at, and integration of possibly ecological concrete and materials, both from the site, but also from the battery, looking at reclaimed maritime elements that can be reused as well. The plant palette is really inspired by the sort of coastal ecology, particularly on Long Island. That's both for our inspiration for the site, but also to really make sure we're selecting something that's going to thrive in this exposed environment. And this is just the diagram, but to kind of talk through some of that coastal scrub edge and some of the species that we're looking at. Happy to dig in and talk more, but I'll just gonna look at that. And finding, select canopy species that will grow and provide shade even in a more exposed context. These coastal thickets, a little more dense, engaging, sort of a dense enveloping planting, and really trying to create a layered edge in some of these locations. And some of the additional understory adjacent to that, the boardwalks as we move out towards the end here. Again, for the lawn and the plaza and the bioswales near a more urban palette. And so, yeah, so that's the overview. Happy to dig into any specific elements, but this really, responds to creating a pretty, we hope and think a pretty diverse and dynamic and unique space that's different from, say, what people are getting at Sunset Park, Bush Terminal Park, and really serve both the tenants of Made at Bush Terminal, but also the Sunset Park neighborhood. Yeah. And happy to answer.
Before I turn it over to my fellow commissioners, can you just explain to us, you said it's filled pier.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that is?
Yeah. So it's solid ground, basically from an engineering team. They, basically put caissons in or bulkheads and just dumped urban fill behind it. So it's solid ground. It's urban fill, but it's all solid ground. It's not on structure.
So why?
It's a peninsula. I'm sorry. You want to just come on?
Yeah.
Sure, sorry. So we call it a pier, but it really is, as a landform, a peninsula, but a pier kind of reflects the maritime usage as it was, as there were boats docking and taking like goods on and off. But you should consider it to be just like a land, a buttons.
It's not on piles.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
So
It's a peninsula built out of fill.
Exactly.
so it's like the Gansevoort, like
What?
the Gansevoort Peninsula in Hudson River Park.
That it's very similar to that.
But why then are there piles on the edges?
Because the edges were built out of platform, so.
Yeah, so there's a tuning fork. Do we have a picture of that?
You sort of see, basically, It is still that there is a moment where there was like, and they platform just along, oh, sorry. I believe they had platform just along the edge, right? So the outer edge to allow like boats to dock up. So you do see these piles and collapsed concrete, but you'll see behind it, you'll see the riprap and fill that was under it.
And what will that, thank you, that's really helpful. What will that look like then?
Sure, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so we're doing something sort of innovative and unique on this pier is we are doing a shoreline stabilization that we're calling an improved existing, which means that we're going to keep those big concrete slabs on the pier and fill in the voids with new riprap to make sure that the pier is stabilized, but also to keep the sort of historical texture and to make sure that we're not like causing further disturbance. Like right now, there are ecologies that have emerged out of these voids and out of this material. So we don't want to disturb that too much.
Yeah, so just to show it, basically what the engineers are looking at is to put like a cutoff wall inside of what's the sort of recognized edge. And then break this up a little so nothing's like stable, nothing's dangerous, and augment it with larger revetment stone as needed to make sure it's stabilized, rather than just excavating everything out and replacing it wholesale with revetment. Obviously, I think there's still some.
If you go back to your section, I think you can
Oh,
see
yeah.
that a little more clearly where that wall is. So you're basically doing kind of like an onion, right? Like interior of the pier is stabilized up to that cutoff wall, and then the rest is led to kind of erode within the current conditions that you have,
this
plus
is
or minus.
This is about, because the tide pool's a little different because it has that, but where's the line? I think it shows. Yeah, so about 2 weeks. The end of the, the end of the pier is slightly different in that the cutoff wall will be set back further, but in every other, for the rest of the pier, the cutoff wall will be right there, and you'll just see it.
And the cutoff wall is new.
Yeah.
So you're stabilizing that portion.
That's right. We're going to stabilize approximately 75% of the pier. And then that 25% at the tip of the pier, if you want to go back to that, is there will be something called a windrow, which is really just a hidden rock revetment. And as the pier like slowly erodes over time, that windrow would deploy. And those boardwalks are pile supported. And so folks could still go out and kind of see the water and see the ecology, and they wouldn't erode away. So you just slowly just see more and more of that boardwalk. And then we have an erosion management plan to make sure that any of those like large chunks of concrete and everything like doesn't get into the shipping channel and kind of all those considerations.
I think the study is for like that, you're talking about like 100-year process for that, but it is, and it came from the Army Corps manual. We didn't like make it up. Like this is an erosion stabilization technique that is used.
One of the things in that I always notice is Canadian geese.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Sure, I mean, this will be a maintenance and I think something to refine, but there's a keen desire.
You are planning a large lawn.
Yeah.
My question is, it's really desperately needed there. What are you gonna do to break up the flight patterns? Or else it'll be unusable.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things
Rob,
that we're always struggling with this in lawns in urban areas. And I think one of the advantages here is, I'm just gonna go to the plan, like. Is working on the maintenance and operations plan with EDC. So the park will be maintained and operated by EDC. I mean, guys, feel free to weigh in, but part of that will be, how do we deter geese as well as the regular maintenance of the plantings. But
All of this.
yeah,
And then not have it usable to the
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
On a Saturday and Sunday afternoon.
and I think we're hearing, it's a very different park, but part of the reason we don't have active recreation or playgrounds here is it's coming at Bush Terminal Park. But I think there are things that have worked and not worked there. And particularly as part of the next phase, now that we've like honed in on the lawns and the scales, more of the design and program is more follow-up conversations with with the folks at Bush Terminal Park to understand what challenges, maintenance and operations challenges there are. So we're thinking about those as we refine the design here.
And that's a great segue to some of my questions, because I've been to Bush Terminal Park and they do have the geese problem. They do have open lawns. I think it changes seasonally. I don't go there that often to know, but I think the amount of geese or not changes seasonally. But one of the things that's, I think a little bit challenging there, and you have a similar condition here, is this kind of woodland end. That woodland end has established over time, as you mentioned, you do have native and non-native species. And at least what happens on Bush Terminal Park is that even though there is a perimeter path, people just create their own desired lines. And that whole area is full of nooks and crannies of things that people have established, which in a way gives it to me, is interesting because it's such an urban condition. And suddenly when you get into that woodland, you feel completely immersed in nature, yet you have these great views of the harbor. But it also poses a bit of a security maintenance question and also an ecological question. How do we control those non-native species and ensure they don't impact some of the new landscape that you're creating? So to that end, I guess my question is, what is your plan on managing what's there right now? Are you looking to remove invasives and keep natives? You did mention you're adding more planting. Is that planting thought of in a kind of ecological reforestation way that also suppresses the non-natives from coming through? And lastly, how are you protecting the new plantings from being invaded by the non-natives?
These are great points and things that we're actively working on and talking about. And I'll let Julia chime in if I miss anything too. But the first thing I want to address is the safety and nooks and cranny issue. I think we heard that people were interested in nature, but also had issues with the nature at Bush Terminal Park specifically. There isn't access into that. So part of this was looking at creating access and also, making sure the spaces between were visually, would be visually permeable. There's probably refinement to be done, but that's something that is constantly in our minds here. Also active conversations with potential stewardship partners like Billion Oyster Project or Sunset Sparks, who are going to use the space for education. So if we keep active, that's that. Management of invasives. The planting, you can kind of jump back to the planting plan. The intent is to actually, do a very active design planting of these areas, but in this area, not really doing much except removing trash, removing debris, and selective invasive removals, right? Selective invasive removals and potentially restorative planting with some of those ideas in mind in terms of what are native species, but very competitive, hardy native species. And this is something that we'll be working on and refining, also working with ecologists at Arcadis on the planting palettes specifically for that restorative zone.
We can talk a little bit more in
Yeah.
specifics. There are 3 quote unquote invasive species really on the pier. There's black locust, which we are mostly going to keep on the pier. We'll take out in strategic locations, but we think they're really ecologically valuable for the space. And then there's those 2 other, there's a hawthorn, tree of heaven, and then a lot. And so we're going to remove all the tree of heavens. And then I think there's a hyacinthia or something. Honeysuckle, there's a honeysuckle, and then we're going to remove that just to be very specific. And we want to clear out kind of the underbrush and all the weeds that are also would help kind of the safety.
And plant, but trying to kind of keep some of that multi-layered, and particularly part of the reasons of keeping the black locust is people have observed birds there. And so to remove it all, the idea of valuable birding habitat is something that we heard from some of the environmental organizations like Billion Oyster Project and others that are working in there. So
it's a tough balance, I would say. Just keep in mind that your new planting might be impacted by all of these invasives that travel. I worked on the Highline Western Rail Yards where the idea was always to preserve the existing landscape. And that existing landscape is a emergent landscape, right? It found its way through the railroad tracks. Obviously, it's very strong, somewhat invasive. And what we found when we renovated the Highline next to it is once a month, we would see all of those species on the Western Rail Yards migrate into the gardens of the Highline and outcompete the new plants that we placed. So is this challenge where I think you're doing a great thing, and that thicket area is such a unique character of this whole Brooklyn waterfront. I think absolutely you should keep it, but think about when you're thinking ecologically about the plants next to it and making sure they're extremely resilient, that they're not going to be taken over, especially by the understory, or maybe even kind of a layering where you put your strongest species closest to this area. And perhaps if you wanted something a little bit more delicate or ornamental farther away, because it will get taken over.
Yeah.
Which again brings to the next question. If EDC is maintaining this, to what extent can you, as you mentioned, pair up with other groups that maybe specialize in this, and can take stewardship over these areas, because it will be very challenging. And I suspect that's one of the reasons why Bush Terminal Park either has the thicket or lawn.
Yeah.
Like there's no in between.
And I think that's one of the, I mean, we really can chime in if you want, but I think that's one of the things that we see as a really great opportunity here is the design is going to happen in parallel with EDCs. We're going to be talking about the maintenance strategy. So we're going to be designing for that. And that's part of, it's not fully worked out because they'll be designed together. And, if there's more maintenance, it might change the attitude and intensity of what we do in design. If there's less, it's more, but that's like an active conversation that we're having and that you guys are having with potential park stewardship partners too.
It's a great challenge to have.
Yeah.
One to just think about
We
very,
definitely having worked, extensively in the Gowanus and other areas, we
that.
acknowledge this challenge.
So then the last two questions have to do again with that area. You are creating these elevated boardwalks and then these kind of at-grade paths. One, are you providing accessibility to those at-grade paths? And how are you preventing people from carving their own? And two, you've decided to only illuminate that one area. Is the idea that there would be signs or some sort of way to indicate to the general public that the rest of the paths are not illuminated from a safety
It'd be like,
perspective?
This is not lit at night. In terms of the density, like part of the reason that we are planting along the boardwalks is to allow for a density of planting to discourage stepping off the boardwalks. And that's true in other areas of the park too. We are looking at smaller plant rails, in the next, low to discourage that. But again, that's something that we'll be thinking about throughout. But the part of the idea of planting along the boardwalks was just for experience and cooling, but also to be able to control the density a little more and add soil volume to ensure we could get that robust.
Well, then the connection will be gangway, metal gangways.
Oh, yeah.
So they're temporary and also movable, so they can be removed as the land erodes. Oh, they're shown on our plan. They're pretty light, but they're a gray color. And they'll be ADA accessible.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Right.
My questions are also about that area. First, I'm just wondering, you've provided some spots, like you get down on the north and then that kind of length on the south to enjoy that amazing view. I'm just wondering if you have any concerns that, given that there's not a lot of occupiable area on that western edge, that people will start to occupy the rocks, because that's kind of where you want to be. I mean, if I were on this landscape, I would go directly out to the end. So.
And that's why we kept in terms of where we could preserve, it was important to locate that sort of vegetated area at the end, but that's why we made the boardwalk out to the end. And also to provide the get down and this other little spur to sort of create a lot of space and moment for people to do that, to discourage it.
It's also pretty wide. So that boardwalk is, how wide is it, Julian?
15 feet.
It's 15 feet, and we're going to add seating and make that a place where people can feel like they can hang out, because you're right, we want to keep people off the rocks.
Right.
And there are going to be a lot of signs warning about the dangers of going onto the rocks and to please stay off. And especially that'll be necessary kind of as the erosion
kind of occurs.
So
And then
that's the question, like
Yeah.
this here, there's not more there because of the condition of the edge. I see.
exactly, like, we're viewing that as sort of a natural space where folks can see what sea level rise and erosion kind of do to a pier. It's
Mm.
both sort of a learning lab and an experience. And then you'll have different views of it. So you'll have that main beautiful view of the harbor, but as you go on that boardwalk, you'll also see the edge start to erode and kind of the pier or like the piles of the boardwalk will be revealed. And then on that southern boardwalk, it's a little narrower, so it's not necessarily as much of like a hangout spot.
I mean, this one?
That, yeah, exactly. That will be another area where you can go right out to the edge and see the edge. And you'll also be able to see the edge kind of erode away and that boardwalk start to be revealed.
And there's no opportunity to make a more generous end here or here. I just think like as a desire,
question.
thing,
Mhm.
a lot of people will come there and they'll be like, okay, this is where I want to be. You know what I mean?
And you kind of want to stop people from trying to carve their own space, right? And there's two ways to effectively do it. One, provide a more generous space or various. And two, the idea of signage, I really like that because when you go to a natural preserve and you are on a boardwalk, it never crosses your mind to get off that boardwalk and go scramble around. But here it does, right? And Bush Terminal Park is like the example. I have found hammocks there. I have found beach chairs because people make their own spaces. And I think the balance between creating a space and signage that tells you this is why the space is here. Don't ruin nature. Don't step on the bird's nest. Things like that, I think is what's going to be key for success.
Yeah, I think so too, because years ago when I worked for parks, I remember we did an experiment where we did 2 shoreline restorations. One we just said keep out and the other we explained. And the one that we explained why received no damage and the other was completely trashed.
Wow, okay, that's a very good lessons learned for us.
We're
Yeah,
looking at energy.
okay.
So people are very, if you kind of take people from the point of view of like, we all want the same thing, a diverse ecosystem, and folks like stay off because that's why we're doing it. I think that will be more convincing than just keep off, you know? I'm also wondering, I have a question about like these paths. What's the kind of, what was your rationale for that citing of those? Because I'm particularly wondering about like this little spot right there and how, and what, like, I don't sort of understand the elbow thing.
Yeah, I could take a first stab and then pass it off to Julia. What we heard from the community is that they really wanted to feel like they could walk through nature and walk through the forest, sort of like a forest path. So that's why we created those lines. And I'll leave it to Julia for why the geometry.
Sure. Well, we are still refining the location of those, but they connect the 2 boardwalks. So it makes it sort of a network. And it gives you the experience of walking through the woodland.
Right.
And I think we also just decided from being out on site, we drew it where the nicest features are.
I see.
Yes.
It's great connections. We're trying to balance this desire that we're hearing between like being in nature, but also like not feeling lost or like I'm gonna come around someone's like tent encampment in the woods. So this like idea that you could get on, you could do it, but you could see the end if that's where you were. So some of the straight shots are based on that. But I think that area, you know, because of the nature of that area and what we've discussed about the windrow, it's something that could be a very simple you know, maintained path that we could change. Whereas the boardwalks would be more fixed.
I totally get that. And that makes, now that you explained it, it makes perfect sense to me because you can like enter here, go across here, go back to this. So I guess I would maybe just consider like, maybe this has to do with certain trees there or something. I don't know, but that one just seems a little strange to me because I don't know that it's adding so much to this experience. And then there's this weird little spot between the 2. So maybe just take a look
Maybe
at that.
showing the like particular trees or moments that we.
Maybe it's that.
All right.
Commissioners, any other comments? Okay, so just quickly to summarize, we're not taking a vote, but Commissioner Tisch had asked for you all to consider like the lawn maintenance plan, which I'm sure you're already considering. And we are, Commissioner Castilla asked you to think about the resilience of the plant communities and the proximity of more managed and less managed landscapes and how they're going to relate to each other. And like, you know, getting real about like, are we really going to pull those weeds every week or whatever? And then I was particularly interested in, because I just was like thinking about my own experience of this kind of landscape, what your experience is at the end of the boardwalks and whether there is a place that you can come to rest and get a little shade and just hang out and enjoy that spectacular view. So we would ask that you consider those things. But overall, I think I speak for everyone here because we've talked about this together, that we're really excited about this. It's a huge addition for this community. And also we really appreciate the efforts here to create some delight around natural systems, the tide pool and the woodland, and the effort that it's harder to keep that than to not. So, so we really appreciate that and look forward to like visiting.
Thank you. That's really driven
Thank
the
you.
design.
Yes, it's evident.
Glad to hear that.
You can see it.
And it's a great presentation today.
Yeah, very, very. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and with that, it concludes our meeting and the public meeting is now adjourned.